Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's edition of All Things Change. This is a show that's a conversation with women leading in today's changing world. And during the month of February, this is all about career. So part of my methodology as a coach is to focus on, some of the fundamental aspects of leadership that help us succeed in today's changing world. And one of those topics is increasing visibility. That's a topic I hear about a lot from clients and my community. And I'm really excited today to welcome Colleen Tartow, Dr. Colleen Tartow, who has over 20 years of experience in data, advanced analytics, engineering, and consulting. She has been self-described as obsessed with data her entire life. And she's adept at assisting organizations and really deriving value from data-driven culture. She has a PhD in astrophysics. She is director of engineering at Starburst, and it is a real pleasure to have you here today, Colleen. So welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm fascinated by this idea of increasing visibility, and I think it's well acknowledged that that there are challenges for women in technology. So I'm especially excited to hear your perspective and your own experience, and what you think you'd like to have women understand about this aspect of our careers. It's a really important one.
Yeah. I think in technology in general, it's easy to downplay your abilities or your accomplishments, and particularly when you are underrepresented and you don't see a lot of people like you that, gets compounded. I am naturally an extroverted introvert, but I definitely, I'll need a nap after this, like we'll definitely it takes energy for me to be extroverted, and I can be social in the right situations, but ultimately like my happy place is a quieter situation. And I'm not naturally the kind of person who feels comfortable talking about myself or my accomplishments. And I think that's fairly common. Women generally do tend to be far worse at sharing their own accomplishments. And, I squarely fit into that bucket. And that means that for my own accomplishments, I tend to deflect personal credit and focus on the team credit. And that's wonderful from a management and a leadership perspective, but it's less good for my own personal brand and my own personal credit. And honestly, that's something that I've been uncomfortable with for years. And I think that's fairly common. And there are a lot of issues that's related to imposter syndrome or whatnot. Um, so instead of taking credit for things that are due to me, my tendency, and I think the tendency of a lot of women in general or in technology, is to deflect any praise and say, well, it's really a team effort and don't invite scrutiny upon yourself. And
Mhm.
honestly, when I see other women doing that, I think, well, that stinks because that's something that men don't do, not in the same way. Um, and so for me, over the last couple of years, I've tried to be more intentional about who I am and what are my personal career goals and how do I want to be seen by others. And especially in today's world where we're living our lives online, that really breaks down to your online persona. And a colleague of mine framed that as, what do people see when they Google you? And
Mm.
so I actually Googled myself and I was like, it's not really a theme. And so I did think that was a really good way of thinking about it. So in my mind, I think writing and social media and videos that people see when they Google you, and that's, your online personal brand. And that's how that works these days. And we're sort of the sum of those parts. Um, when life plays out online. And so I've been trying to be more intentional about that. And I think that's a challenge for all women in technology, but I think that's something that we need to get better at.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that, and I can see how that tendency to downplay accomplishments that a lot of women share would be exacerbated
Mhm.
in technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'd like to say I think we are getting better at it, and there are more and more safe venues for women to practice taking credit for their expertise, and whether it's at social media, on conferences, on podcasts like this one.
Mhm.
And I do think we'll get better and better at it, because one barrier to that is that women get stuck in execution mode, and they don't take the time to look back and think about the strategic value that they're adding. And so I think that, especially with online conferences and podcasts and things, that, women are great at raising each other up. I think the myth of the catty women fighting is exactly that. It's a myth. And I think women are amazing at lifting each other up and, being each other's champions. And so I do think we'll get better at that.
Yeah. There's something added in there though that I love. Like, so we're talking about that raising that visibility, but it starts with what are you doing that you want to make more visible, and that shift out of execution mode and more into strategy. When did you start to make that more of a conscious shift for yourself, and what's something that you changed?
The last time I was looking for jobs, and I apologize if you can hear my toddler crying. Of course he picked
Yeah.
right now, right? Well, the last time I started to look for jobs, I sort of was developing my story around who I was and what I was looking for, because that's always the first question on any interview. And I started thinking about, this is how I present myself to people, but if you Google me, you won't see that. And I wanted to be more intentional about it. And one of the things I did when I first started at Starburst was I attended an online public speaking accelerator program for women. It's called Shine. And it was just an absolutely amazing experience. And a huge part of the message that we receive through that is that no matter what your experience is or who you are, you have something important to say, and your experience is unique. So even if you're speaking about something that's been covered before, you provide an interesting perspective to that conversation. And the pure support of the women in that program and what we gave to each other was really something that I cherish to this day. And on top of that, I think it's important that we're getting more and more women out there speaking at conferences and on podcasts and on LinkedIn Live, et cetera. And so I think one thing that I was able to do was sort of take that and use it as a pivot point where I was more comfortable speaking about myself and my accomplishments and contributing to the overall discourse about, data management or, women in technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really relate to that. I feel like sometimes, before I made this career shift, the conversation started and ended with me thinking, well, that's been said, that's been done, or, but getting into more of a creative space for my career, I've realized, like, if I just stop and think about this and what I actually want to, what is my perspective, it shifts, it grows, it gets more articulate, and the act of speaking just helps you actually sharpen your thinking and what contribution you do need to make. So you really can't just like wait, I don't think, until like you've got this perfect, snazzy message to share. It has to kind of evolve as you go and get comfortable with that.
Yeah, and the more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. I mean, I also noticed I interview a lot of people. We're hiring, as I will mention later. But I interview a lot of people, and that sort of first 2 minutes of the interview is the same for every single interview. And I can almost do it without thinking about it, because what I'm doing is introducing myself and the interview process and where we're going to go from here and putting that structure around the interview. And it's just the same for when you're speaking. You get used to like sort of just repeating who you are and what you're going to talk about. And so I think the more that you do it, the easier it becomes too, which is really something that seems obvious in retrospect, but at the time I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's hard to get over that hump at first.
Yeah.
So you shared that you're a bit of an extroverted introvert. And I know in my career, a lot of the women I worked with were also introverted. I came from an organization that had a big publishing business. They were there because they loved books. They loved to read. And so the idea of, putting themselves forward and being more visible was, horrifying or just a bit too much or somewhere in that spectrum. So what tips do you have for that introvert that might help them get over that hump?
I would say that, I find public speaking to this day absolutely terrifying. I mean, this is easy, especially because online you often can't see the audience. Like right now, I can only see you. So finding situations like, even if it's a podcast or a LinkedIn Live, where it feels more like a conversation, that can get you over that hump. But honestly, like public speaking still terrifies me, but I read somewhere that just because you're anxious doesn't mean you're not going to be good at it, right? And
Mm.
just the nerves, nobody ever died from getting up on a stage in public speaking, I don't think.
No, I
I'm
don't think
pretty
so.
sure that's true. Maybe that's but honestly, like, this kind of started as a New Year's resolution for me, which is embarrassing but true. And, I wanted to be a voice in the data community. I wanted to have an online presence. And I love data and I'm passionate about the number of women in STEM and, in STEM generally and in data specifically. And so I feel strongly of that part of the way I can help move the needle there is by speaking out. And so, my desire to do that outweighed, me being terrified of getting on a stage.
Yeah.
Um, and, so I think you find that thing that you're passionate about, and then that can help you get over that hump too. Because if you're passionate, people will listen, people
Yeah.
care.
So, so what I'm hearing is, for those women who have that hump to get over in terms of being introverted, and probably even, our, you know, our favorite extroverts struggle with that to some degree. It's, really focusing on that passion and letting that be a little bit, make things a little easier to share your voice. What do you see in the workplace that just leaders as a collective, including our male allies, can do to support women being more visible?
That's a great question. I have had people, men ask me that question. And I think a huge part of it is that those men who do have platforms or podcasts or, are on, hiring committees or setting up conferences, they need to be aware that they don't have to accept the status quo. Um, I also, as an aside, one of my biggest pet peeves is when there's a conference that has an all male speaker lineup. And so they solve that by having an all female panel called Women in Data or Women in Technology. And that's where the women get to speak. And it's like, instead of being invited to help lead the discourse around data, they're being pigeonholed and asked to speak only about their gender experience within the field as opposed to the field themselves. And I feel like
Yes.
that's such a joke. It's, I refuse to be on those panels. I want to be speaking about data, not about the fact that I'm a woman, which has
Yeah.
nothing to do with my contributions to the field. And so I do think that men need to be conscious of this, and whether it's racial or gender diversity, there's a drastic underrepresentation of certain demographics and technologies and other industries. And so part of that is to take action. If you're pulling together a conference lineup, make sure you're looking for women as your keynote speakers. I was speaking to a man who was helping put together a conference lineup, and he was like, well, I just don't know where to find women speakers. And I'm like, then you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
Frankly, like, go look for a women in tech conference, and there's probably like 30 speakers on that docket that you could choose from, right? Like,
Mm.
reach out to them. It's not their responsibility to solve your problem. You have to solve your own problem. Um,
Yeah.
I was on a podcast where I was the first woman that they had, or the first woman in a year or something. And I jokingly was like, well, try harder. And apparently
Mhm.
that worked. They've done really well since then, which is wonderful to see. Um, but I mean, I do think it's your responsibility, regardless of who you are, when you're setting up things that are allowing people to give a voice, that you look at who you're enabling to have that voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of, an in-person event or even a virtual event where you could just literally look at the flyer of who's speaking and just sort of pick somebody. But I mean, even beyond that, just the internet offers so much opportunity to
Mm.
connect with people, to see what's going on, see who's out there. So no
Yeah.
excuses is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Yes, do better. I mean, I said this to that one person, and I heard him on another episode of the podcast joking about how I had said to him, do better, but apparently it worked. So I'm happy to be part of
Yeah.
it.
Sometimes it stings a little. It's a little uncomfortable at first, but
Mhm.
it becomes the best medicine in
Yeah.
the end. And especially if it comes from a place that's, you know, you know, passionate and, with the solution in mind. It's
Mhm.
it's not, it has the space to really, have legs and make a big difference. So
Yeah. And I think it's like for hiring managers, it's the same thing as, well, women candidates just aren't out there in engineering. Like, obviously, that is not true. And I
Hmm.
think that just means you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So we've been talking a bit about how visibility that might sort of seem to lend itself more externally.
Hmm.
Um, what are your thoughts on ways to increase visibility within your organization for purposes of promotion and that kind of thing?
I mean, I think it is a lot of the same, right? It's a lot of the same concepts of like understanding how people view you. Like, are you quiet and shy on the company Slack? Are you, raising your hand in meetings in the before times when we had meetings where you could raise your hand? And just being vocal, and that might be getting out of your comfort zone, but it's also important to make sure that your voice is heard. And from an engineering perspective, I think people are comfortable commenting on PRs, but they might not be comfortable commenting on a company Slack. And I think you need to sort of get your voice out there, and
Hmm.
that tells people who you are, but also what your accomplishments are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I shared with a client recently, it was a bit of a different context, but I think it applies here as well. We can get really caught up in, what other people's perspective might be, or what other people would think of, a situation, and lose our own perspective in that. And what I offered her was, ask yourself, what does this conversation need, and be the one to take the conversation there. So sometimes if a conversation is losing focus or direction,
Mhm.
everyone's just sort of hoping and waiting someone will kind of bring it back into focus, and you can be that person, or you can ask that curious question that changes the
Yeah.
direction of a conversation. So
Yeah.
that's something that can maybe help some people.
Yeah, I think it gets back to ownership too. Like not being afraid to own a conversation, or, like you said, be like, you know what, I'm happy to own that and make that decision, or, you know, gather
Hmm.
the evidence and help make the decision. But, I think I used to get scared to be the person to that, because I felt like I would end up being a note taker. And that's sort of my like, in a room full of men, if the woman is taking the notes, that's not a position I was happy with. But I do think that now I'm more comfortable with that, because I know that that means I'm taking ownership over it, and I'm, saying that I'm integral to this decision, and so I'm happy with that. And I think that's
Mm,
important.
yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of I think I read it was something in Harvard Business Review, but this tendency that women can fall into of not wanting that awkward silence of, like, we need that note taker, and so like they
Yeah.
fill the space by taking it on,
Yeah.
and that can accumulate to you doing a bunch of little
Mhm.
things that don't give you that visibility.
Mhm.
Have you
Yeah,
ever have you ever found that, and
absolutely.
resisted the temptation to do something just because it made the situation better for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. And, yeah, and I think from a larger perspective, it's that, I'm very well organized. I definitely have a tendency to just be like, "Okay, I'll just, like, bring this all together and we can make a decision," and you end up getting stuck in execution mode. And I alluded to this earlier, that can prevent you from making those strategic decisions, because you're willing to raise your hand for everything, and that means that you don't get to sit back and sort of, rise to that strategic level, because you're stuck in execution mode. And a colleague of mine, Jess Andiorio, wrote an article that went viral a couple years ago called "She's Not Strategic." And it was all about
Mm,
that phenomenon of women not being seen as strategic, because they're getting stuck in execution mode, because they're not comfortable with no one else volunteering, and they'll volunteer for everything, and then you end up getting stuck focusing on that without being able to sort of see the forest for the trees. And so I do think it's important for women to also put your hand down sometimes, and like knowing
yeah.
when to do that and not volunteer is almost, I would say, just as important as knowing when to volunteer.
Mm, yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
And what do you say to somebody who maybe knows they need to dip their toes in more strategic waters, but isn't really sure what that might mean?
Well, I think, defining what that means is the first step. Like, do you want to be at the VP level? Do you wanna be in the C-suite? Like, what is your goal and where are you now versus what does success look like for you from a strategic standpoint? Does it mean that you're, you know, able to see more broadly across your business and make more decisions with your colleagues at that level, that kind of thing, and then sort of assess where you are and where you want to go, and take action to get to that point. Um, I also think a huge part of that is having a mentor or sponsor who can help you sort of understand how to get there, because you're never going to get there by yourself, right? You always need to have people cheering you on and helping you target that and talking through decisions with you. So, I
Mm,
think making sure that you understand where you want to go specifically, and then also understanding who can help you get there.
yeah. Yeah, that's something we haven't touched on yet, really, which is that having a mentor or sponsor can be a great way to increase your
Mhm.
visibility.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
um, what's worked for you in terms of matching yourself with such a person?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of mentoring, and it's through this network called Plato, which matches up budding engineering leaders or would be engineering leaders with people who are in that role. And so that's been something that for me is a way to give back, as well as, making sure that I'm elevating the level of discourse for people in underrepresented groups. But for me, I think sponsorship is particularly important, and it's challenging to find that within engineering, because it tends to be like, oh, I'm looking for, a woman VP of engineering. And they're like, 5% of engineering leaders are women. So good luck finding that, right?
Mhm.
But I do think that, sponsorship and mentorship can come from anywhere. And it doesn't have to be someone who has the job title that you want. It can be anyone. And sort of figuring out who that could be at any given company, it usually surprises me who it ends up being, frankly. Right now I work a lot with our marketing team, and they've been really helpful in helping me develop my online brand and, develop my voice, but also like giving me ideas about what products to build, right? Like that's coming from the marketing department, which is really wonderful. So I think being open to possibility, but then also just seeing who you gel with and who you look up to, and who, embodies some of the qualities that you're trying to develop in yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so helpful just to get out of a particular box. And I really love the idea of just, following your curiosity and people who just pique your interest, and and that openness can really lead in some really fortuitous and unexpected directions.
Yeah.
So we're coming close to the end of our time together, Colleen, and I'd love just to hear, what your, couple of takeaways you would like our audience uh, to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first is don't be shy. Be yourself and tell your story, because I promise you, you have interesting things to say. Um, some of the times that people have said to me, "You should write about that." I'm like, "Doesn't everybody already know that?" Like, why would I write about
Mhm.
that? And it turns out, people are just interested in what you have to say. And they need to hear it, like, especially if you're in an underrepresented group, make sure you're getting your voice out there to help, inspire other underrepresented people. And to that end, I would also say, be the annoying person in the room if you have to be. Don't stop talking about these things. I know that I annoy everybody in our recruiting meetings when I point out that all of our candidates are white male, right? Um, or that everybody on this conference committee is a man. I
Yeah,
point that out. And I know I'm annoying, but I also know I'm right.
yeah,
And I care deeply about this. I think that, it's been shown time and again that businesses can do better. They can make more money if they have a diverse leadership team. And so, um, I'm trying to do better myself, but also I want to help others do better. And so be action oriented, but also don't stop talking about it.
yeah.
And if I'm not vocal, then the needle definitely won't move. So, like,
Right.
I think we all need to be vocal. So try not to be
Yeah.
going, but be vocal.
Yeah, that's so important, and just embracing a little bit of that discomfort that people need to experience in order to change.
Yeah.
And then I also heard you say know when to put your hand down, as well as when to put it up. And I
Yep.
think that's so wise. And especially as people are, just if you feel really like overwhelmed, you've got so much to do, and knowing when to just kind of let an opportunity pass you by, because it's execution, it's not strategy, it's not going to raise your profile, is great.
Yeah.
Great tip. Good. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Tartow. It's been a genuine pleasure. And I suspect that that like most companies, y'all are hiring at Starburst. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. We are hiring across the board. Literally every role, I think, is hiring. We just closed our D round of funding, and so we are trying to double in the next year. And so I'd love to see more people come in. And so, I think it's a great company. It's a lot of opportunity and a lot of wonderful people. And so definitely reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or I'm just Colleen at starburst.io, and I'd love to hear from people.
Great. Good. And for our audience otherwise, got a couple of things cooking this week. You can go to my website at wendyholtmark.com to learn about my group program that's launching in a couple of weeks. It's called Lead for Lasting Impact. And I'm also running a free training that starts this afternoon at 4:30 that you can sign up for as well. So Colleen, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay.